Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement, I welcome you all to the International Conference on Understanding International Migration. I extend a very warm welcome to our distinguished moderator for the session, Dr. Sasiwan Chingchit, fellow scholars and participants who have joined us through Zoom and are watching us live on Facebook. We're glad to witness your presence today. This international forum aims to bring together rigorous and erudite young scholars working on the migration issues from all around the world over a single platform. This conference is a full-day event with 11 different sessions, with 2 sessions running parallelly throughout in white and green room. This conference is currently featuring 73 scholars from 25 different countries who will be delivering their presentations and will be sharing their understanding on international migration. This session is streaming live on our YouTube channel, so please feel free to share it on your social media handle with the hashtag ICUIM2021. Also, please do follow us on our Twitter @ContactNIICE and subscribe to our YouTube channel, that is Nice Nepal. This is the 3rd session of the conference, and to chair and moderate this particular session, it's a real pleasure to have with us Dr. Sasiwan Chingchit here with us. Dr. Sasiwan Chingchit is an independent research consultant based in Washington, D.C. and a non-resident WST Handa Fellow at Pacific Forum Center for Strategic and International Studies. She used to serve as a lecturer at the Faculty of Political Science, Prince of Songkhla University at Pattani, Thailand, where she conducted and participated in various researches on conflict resolution, civil society, strengthening and democratization. She holds an MA and MPhil in political science from Jawaharlal Nehru University, India, and she was also a visiting fellow at IDSA India. So without any further ado, I request you to please take the session forward. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks so much, Paki. I hope I got your name correctly.
Yes, absolutely. I hope I got yours correctly.
It's fine. I would like to welcome everyone again to the session 4. I'm saying hello to everyone from Bangkok, Thailand. And in this session, we will explore and discuss the gender dimension of international migration. Joining me today are 6 speakers: Dr. Tamanna Khosla, Dr. Binodkumar Singh, Amina Reem VP, Irfan Ahmed Nazir, Surbhi Thakur, and Dr. Katarina Zajacova. Our topic in this session today is very important: gender as identity and how it interacts with other identities of the migrant plays important roles in all aspects of migration. It has influences on reason for migration and experiences of the migrant, which also include risks and vulnerabilities or opportunities. We'll start the session with a presentation on why migration is a feminist issue. Our presenter, Dr. Tamanna Khosla, is an independent scholar from India. Each presenter will have 10 to 12 minutes to present. At the end of all presentations, we will have Q&A. Audience can type in that question and I will gather and read them to the presenters. I want to emphasize again that we have 90 minutes for this session, so please be strict with the time. And we hope to have enough time for a good discussion at the end. Now, Dr. Khosla, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So the topic of today's presentation is why migration is a feminist issue. I'll start with a quotation by Luke Rigere, which is like sexual difference is probably the issue in our time, which could be our salvation if we thought it through. So to introduce, immigration and feminism are rarely coupled in popular discussion, social movements or academic research. But feminists lately have started looking and concentrating on this area. Feminism not just includes, the best part about feminist methodology is it just does not include women, but also issues of race, class, age, physicality of the individual or even the community. That's the importance of feminism in academic research. The narrative surrounding migration and integration remains toxic. Newcomers are being told to integrate and become active citizens. So the whole issue of citizenship comes to picture. Now, as Iris Marian Young spoke about 5 phases of oppression, similarly, UNFPA points out 5 reasons migration is a serious concern for women and girls. Firstly, almost half of the migrants are women and girls, and women are increasingly migrate alone or as heads of households. Some 250 million people are international migrants, people who leave their home countries for opportunity or safety. Some of the movement is driven by conflict. Today, a record high number of people have been forcibly displaced from their homes. It is estimated that about half of all the refugees are females. Women and girls are also significant proportion of economic migrants. They are the vast majority of all migrant domestic workers, for example. Secondly, feminist female migrants face major risks like sexual exploitation, trafficking, and violence. All migrants are vulnerable to abuse and exploitation, but female migrants are particularly at the risk. Women and girls are also face additional vulnerabilities when they are displaced by conflict or natural disasters. Thirdly, migrant women face double discrimination as women and as migrants. Racism and xenophobia are serious concerns wherever large-scale migration takes place, and anti-migrant sentiment is on rise in most countries in the world right now, with the spurt of rightist governments. Negative depictions of migrants and refugees often appear in media, for instance, while the benefits migrants bring, such as economic contribution, rarely make the news. Women and girls can suffer doubly from this attitude, experiencing uh, not only discrimination, but based on migrant status, but also based on their gender. Fourthly, women do not stop getting pregnant when they are on move. Significant number of female migrants are likely to be pregnant or become pregnant. So there is a lot of, what kind of childbearing facilities they have. So these things are there. UNFPA works with government and other partners to uphold migrant right to access sexual and reproductive health care, but much more needs to be done. Fifthly, women and girls are more likely to face health problems both in transit and at their destination. Now, let me just focus on India. Census 2011 revealed that women uh, form almost 70% of the internal migrant community. For migrants in the age of 20 to 34 age group, 38.5% of men have cited causes for migration as work employment, while only 2.7% of women say the same. The numbers are reversed when we observe marriage as a cause of migration, with an average 3.1% men and 71.2% women. The contrast between numbers reflect a pattern. Men migrating for work employment and their wives migrating with them. While it is probable that these women may have found employment later, work wasn't the trigger for their migration. So, this is a discrimination. Like marriage is something which is the reason for women to migrate, but for men it is work. So, economically, women suffer. One could speculate based on these numbers that why Indian community hasn't resisted the idea of women moving out of their native homes to other regions. The resistance mobility of women arises when the reason is non-marriage related. Challenges surrounding migration and the frequent hesitation to migrate are often cited as a bottleneck that affects the impact of educational and employment initiatives like Skill India for women. When it comes to migration, women face both social and structural barriers. That is, a woman often seeks the approval of her father, husband, brother-in-law, etc., etc. Secondly, technology. Most women do not have technology like smartphones or something where they can make their, they can talk across to their community or make women partnerships through smartphones or something. So yeah. Thirdly, women and workplace. Informal women from lower income background, especially with migrants, do not have basic entitlements such as identity documents, housing, and financial services. Migrant women are additionally subject to gender-centric challenges, which includes lower pay compared to their male counterparts, which is a general fact of life. Discrimination of women in workplace takes numerous forms from ranging from absence of maternity benefits to sexual harassment at workplace. Um, in, in a sample of Skill India participants, 62% of unemployed women reported that they are willing to migrate for work, but 70% said they would feel unsafe working away from home. Fourthly, urban planning and policy, a minimum population of 5,000, at least 75% of male main working population engaged in non-agricultural pursuits, and a density of population is of 400% per square meter. Now, what are the solutions to correct these? The multifaceted nature of challenges make it a tough task to tackle. But the good news is that there are organizations that have developed to drive the change. Based on their work, there are strategies which this thing helps. Firstly, childcare support. The starting point of increasing women's workforce participation is recognizing that they are primary caregivers. Seva runs 13 childcare centers in Ahmedabad with about 30 children per center, allowing women to take up better paying jobs and spend long hours working. Technology-based interventions, bringing digital devices into village, help not just women get access to content for learning new skills, it also changes the nature of learning within the community, which is the Pratham way of looking at it. Since 2006, Pratham has been able to connect over 35,000 women to access to smart devices and digital content. Thirdly, women as entrepreneurial leaders. We have noticed high rates of attrition when it comes to women in informal labor, especially that informal sector is marred with several issues like low pay and exploitation. And so we believe there is growing need to foster self-employment. Fourthly, advocacy. It is important to recognize that economic contribution of women migrants, both within the country and abroad. This is the key prerequisite for removing the barriers to female migration while safeguarding their rights and welfare. And one point to be noted is that in India, migration is from rural to urban, while other areas, from urban areas, it's to the outside, different, they're immigrating to outside countries. To conclude, thus according to feminists, we need to as against traits like confidence, authority, assertion, and emotional detachment from the issue to a definition which elevates marks of femininity such as sensitivity, gentleness, and empathy. New definition of citizenship needs to come into play. As Beard makes clear in her Woman and Power manifesto, these feminine characteristics have long been considered weak, or at least unnecessary for those in power. However, to build inclusive societies which operate on the basis of mutual respect and understanding, a feminist approach which capitalizes on such traits will prove to be the answer. Many suggest that feminist policy making is an approach which keeps women's rights at the center through gender sensitive policies and greater involvement of women in their formulation. Um, Women face additional risks when they move and are more likely to uh, have experienced additional traumas before starting their voyages. On top of this, they often face double discrimination in the new community. A feminist approach to policy making should focus on the vulnerability, but also on power. Policy makers must take new approach to inclusion by elevating the feminine trait of empathy to its rightful place, emphasizing how indispensable it is to migration and integration policy making. Instead, feminist policymakers will speak with people from all walks of life, people on the move, who can explain their experiences and unmet needs, those of immigrant backgrounds who have already settled down and can offer their perspective on integration, established communities who can share their worries when it comes to welcoming newcomers, and those with politically dissenting views. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation, Tamanna. The next presentation will be from Dr. Binodkumar Singh, who is from Institute for Conflict Management, India, and he will be presenting on migration and gender in South Asia.
Good morning, everybody. It is morning in India, so I'll say good morning. First of all, I thank NICE for giving this opportunity. I'm going to cover my presentation in 5 parts. Can you share my? Okay, I'll share. I'm just sharing my PPT. Can you see my PPT?
Yes.
Okay. First part is introduction. Migration is any kind of population movement regardless of length, composition, or cause, either across an international border or within a state. It is a global phenomenon. Cross migration poses big challenges for many countries, both in terms of magnitude and variety of migration patterns and processes. However, migrants make huge contribution to the economy and culture of their source and destination countries. Thus, the number of migrants has been increasing. According to the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, there were 280.6 million international migrants out of a global population of 7.8 billion in 2020, accounting 3.6% of global population. Out of this, 48.1% are women. International migrants were 153 million in 1990, 173.2 million in 2000, and 221 million in 2010. This shows the number of migrants are increasing. My next slide is migration in South Asia. South Asia is emerging as a migrant hub of the world, as the percentage of total South Asian migration to international migrant stock has been increasing. Rural distress, natural calamities, and socio-political tensions force increasing numbers of people to migrate, either to urban centers within the region or to the other far-off destinations. Migration in South Asia can be divided into three categories. First one is internal migration within the countries, intra-regional migration within the region, and inter-regional migration outside the region. Next, main features of South Asian migration. The main features of South Asian migrations are the South Asian migrants are temporary migration of labor, and there is predominance of semi-skilled and low-skilled migrant workers, and there are large number of migrants in informal and irregular status, and there is a growing importance of female migrations, and there is also a thriving recruitment industry in the region. Now, next is women migration in South Asia. Migration from South Asian countries is largely male-dominated. Until the 1990s, only a small number of females migrated to overseas destinations as doctors, nurses, and teachers. Later, due to changes in the structure of the labor market, more women started to migrate, and this trend has been increasing over the time. A range of factors compel women workers to migrate for employment. In addition to aspirations for better economic futures, significant push factors may include conflict-related displacement, development-driven displacement, agricultural decline, national resource erosion, natural disasters, and household level economic distress. The table shows that the percentage of female migrants in the South Asian countries. Next, vulnerabilities of women migrants. Due to restrictive practices in the region, women migrants, especially international migration, is considerably low in the region. Such restrictions are found prompting employment aspiring women to take illegal routes. Often, these undocumented migrants fall prey to pernicious practices of illegal recruiters, including trafficking and sexual abuse. The 2020 Global Report on Trafficking in Persons by United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime says women and girls make up 65% of human trafficking victims in 2018. According to the report, in South Asia, 3,340 women, 1,874 boys, 1,573 girls, and only 857 men were detected victims of trafficking in persons in 2018. Further continuing, vulnerabilities. Marginalized women workers traveling in search of employment tend to be from some of the poorest, most marginalized castes and social groups in South Asia. As a result, they confront multiple and intersecting acts of discrimination and violence. They also are also more likely to fall prey to exploitation by recruitment intermediaries, traffickers, and employers. Women workers are also typically find employment in the unorganized sector where their work is undervalued, unpaid, and invisible. Women who migrate for employment may face contradictory responses from their families and communities, ranging from increased dependency to stigmatization. South Asian women left behind by migrant husbands have to face multiple hardships. Women take on the responsibility for the house and child care and can even lose their decision-making power if they stay with their in-laws. If the men don't come home for harvest, women also have to take on the other agricultural work or have to organize male support. Moreover, women cannot continue receiving health care because they lack an accompanying person. They are hesitant to go alone, and they need to care for younger children at home. Next, my conclusion is, international migration is an important part of the livelihood and employment strategy of individuals and households in South Asian countries. Both internal and international migrations have positive consequences for employment, poverty reduction, and economic growth. So governments need to re-examine the protective and restrictive immigration policies for women to protect women migrant workers and promote gender-sensitive international migration policies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Binodkumar, for keeping in within 12 minutes, and also very interesting information that you presented. The next presentation would be from Amina Reem VP. She's a student from Central University, Kerala, India, and the topic is quite timely. Analyzing the nuances of gender-based violence against Rohingyan women before and during the COVID-19 pandemic. Please welcome her. Amina, the floor is yours.
Hello everyone, greetings to everybody. Hope I am audible enough.
Yes.
Hello, hope I am audible enough.
Yes.
Okay. So my topic is analyzing the nuances of gender-based violence against Rohingyan women before and during the COVID-19 pandemic. So if you look at the year 2020, it has been a year that exposed the privilege everybody has, that is the staying at home. But here lies the major question: is staying at home a real privilege to everybody around the world? If you look at the women in particular, if you look at the vulnerable groups, like if you look at the transgender community, if you again look at the vulnerable, the already vulnerable section, that is the refugee women, their conditions are so vulnerable that they had to face a lot of negative impacts of the COVID-19 rather than what we had to face. So let me start with one of the famous quotation of Simone de Beauvoir in her masterpiece work, The Second Sex, which was published in the year 1949. That is, one is not born, but rather becomes a woman. So there is a lot of social conditioning that is happening on the basis of the fabric of patriarchy in our lives and in the lives of everybody we see. Rohingyas are a community in whom the United Nations has described as the most persecuted minority in the world. So if we just brush up the history of the Rohingyans, they are the people who had to face a lot of oppression under the Myanmar government in different forms. Like they had to face a lot of oppression because of the withholding of their citizenship rights, and also they had to face a lot of sexual violence and the mass killings and all. Now, generally, Rohingyans are a conservative community with restricted mobility and no control over resources for women. So there are certain social and cultural norms that restrict the rights of the women, and they cannot even get out of their house after they attain the puberty. Also, if you look at the population, the majority of the Rohingyan refugees are women and children, around more than 59%. If we look at the impact of the COVID-19, definitely it had its greater impact on the marginalized groups, including the women, female sex workers, and transgender community. Now let us see what are the reasons for the increased gender-based violence against women in the Rohingya community. First of all, it is a normalization of violence and the social and cultural structure. In a recent research by BBC Media Action, a Rohingyan woman has responded that even a woman does not like a woman, even a woman does not like a disobedient woman. So patriarchy is so much conditioned, or it is deeply rooted in the fabric of the community. Now, the second reason is the economic tension. Definitely, poverty is a reason for increased violence against the women, because men tends to kind of physically and sexually exploit women because of their frustrations and all. The next is the male frustration, the lack of livelihood opportunities, and the lack of a legal structure. Though there has been some sort of legal facilities, it wasn't kind of decentralized, or it wasn't provided to the needy. Now, the lack of gender segregated facilities, insufficient number of the female doctors in the camp, lack of access to gender-based violence services, because earlier they had some sort of services in particular to the women and children, but as a result of the COVID-19 and all, many of the resources were not available to the women, and there is a lack of information dissemination. Now, if you look at the child marriage as such, in Rohingyan community, child marriage is something which is very prominent. Even though 18 is a legal age, parents do marry off their children just after they start menstruating. It can be at the age of 15 or 16, which is very horrible and which is very scary. Now, let us look at the reasons for the child marriage. First of all, it is the economic reasons. Since women are prohibited from working, a girl child is considered as a burden in the house, in the family. So they believe that if they marry off their children, they can gain a space in the shelter, and also they have one mouth less to feed. The second reason is the advantages of marrying young. Because economic advantages of marrying young, because the groom will only demand a less dowry when the girl is young, and also there is a conception among them that they believe that the beauty diminishes after the age of 16, which is also really horrible. Now, the next is the religious reason, because the parents consider that it is their religious responsibility to marry off their children at a very young age. And then it is the societal pressure because of the fear of the love marriages that is happening because of the lack of privacy in the camps, in the host communities. Next, it is the another, can you, next slide. Okay, so the another important issue is the intimate partner violence, which is also very much normalized in the Rohingyan community. The physical, sexual, and emotional violence has been normalized in such a way that women cannot even voice out about their concern, because they believe that they have certain, they are performing their duty towards their husband, and they consider it as their moral duty. And also there is a more horrible one is the normalization of the forced intercourse even during the times of menstruation and also at a late stage of pregnancy. Now, there has been an increased cases of sexual abuse and exploitation. Also, there has been an increase in the mass rape of Rohingyan women and children by the Myanmar authorities, which happened in 2017. And also, there is undernutrition in women and children due to the gender-based violence or inequality in providing services and access to a lot of facilities. And also, there has been increased cases of forced prostitution, and also polygamy is also very much prevalent. Now, if you look at the gender-based violence during the COVID-19 pandemic, the nationwide lockdown in host communities and the overcrowded camps, unhygienic facilities has not only increased the cases of COVID-19, but also has increased the cases of the sexual abuse and sexual exploitation. The major reason is because of the lack of livelihood means, and the desperation and also the frustration among the men has increased the cases of domestic violence and also the sexual exploitation. Also, there has been increased intimate partner violence and sexual abuses, and the shutdown of child and women friendly spaces, because earlier they had a lot of child and women friendly spaces. For example, there has been child friendly park, and also there has been some facilities given to the survivors of the sexual assault and all. But as a result of the COVID-19 protocols and also the issues related to the COVID-19, they were forced to shut down that, and also more importance were given to the medical aspects and all. Now, another reason is anxiety over the food shortage. Definitely, COVID-19 has something which has impacted all over the world. And for example, if you look at the case of the Rohingyan refugees, they had lost their means of livelihood, and as a result, they were not able to find the resources for food, and that was the anxiety over food shortage has also increased the cases of domestic violence. And the next is the human trafficking. Rohingyans are vulnerable to human trafficking as well as drug smuggling. Recent months has seen dozens of boats carrying hundreds of Rohingyans stranded at sea. According to the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, 59% smuggled are women and girls, many of whom are likely to be married off to men throughout the region. And there also has been shutdown of educational psychological support system for the women and children, internet blockade and restricted communication that hinders protection to the victims of domestic and the sexual abuse. Now, inadequate healthcare infrastructure for women has also increased the vulnerabilities they had faced. Now the question is, what can be done, or what are the practical solutions that we can do in order to protect them? Now, there has internal as well as external solutions that we can make. Sir, can you move to the next slide? Okay, so there are internal as well as external solutions that are practical. But even though we say that there are a lot of solutions, we all know that the solutions are, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of energy and effort from the authorities, because this particular issue is very vulnerable and very sensitive, because there are already refugees and there are already vulnerable refugee women among them. Now, first of all, the internal changes that has to be made is to change the attitude of the women and children in particular. Also, not only the women and children, but also the men and also all the transgender community and everybody, all the gender, because it is essential that people shed away from the notions of the patriarchy and they realize the importance of the gender equality. Awareness campaigns are necessary to denormalize these deep-rooted norms among men, women, and the transgender community. And also there is an important need to educate the risk of child marriage and also intimate partner violence. And the external measures can be, the most important is the role of media, because even though it is the authorities that makes the final decision, it is very important that the information is passed to the most important authorities. So the media has an important and efficient role to play in disseminating proper medical as well as the humanitarian information, because in most of the cases, women and children are not aware of many of the services provided to them because of their restricted mobility and also lack of access to the information and all. Now also there is a need for to ensure an efficient legal system, and also the prioritization of the needs of the women and girls, especially during the times of the COVID-19. But again, we don't know what is going to happen, but let's be optimistic that there can be some measures in order to resolve their major issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Amina. So, wow, we're doing well with the time, it seems. Shall we move to the next presentation by Irfan Ahmed Nazir? Irfan is a student from Jawaharlal Nehru University, and he'll be presenting on gender and migration in South Asia, challenges and opportunities.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, ma'am. And thank you, NIICE, for giving me this opportunity. Now, as we know that migration is a part and parcel of life in South Asia. If you look at the contemporary history of South Asia, it begins with the largest migration in human history, the partition of British India in 1947, and it led to the migration of refugees from India to Pakistan and vice versa. So here I will be looking at gender aspects in migration with a particular focus on South Asian region. Now, why this is important is because gender is a useful tool in understanding the power dynamics in societies, especially in patriarchal and parochial South Asian societies. Now, in this particular presentation, I have divided into 3 parts. In the first part, I will look at how does women decide whether to migrate or not. By this, I mean the agency of women in migration, like the ability to make a choice to whether migrate or not. So here it has been highly influenced by patriarchy, because the active male member in families, whether it's husband or father or even father-in-law or any other dominant male member in the family, gets to decide whether the women should migrate or not because of the patriarchal norms. Or it could be the households as a whole, as a cardinal unit, which makes the decision. So here the women's role in making a decision about whether she should migrate or not is minimal. And if we look at the World Migration Report of 2020, at the global level, 48% of the international migrants are women. But if you look at South Asia, it is just 36%. Now, this comes because in these South Asian societies, people tend to believe that migration is unsafe for women, and because of the cultural taboos and dogmas that restrict the women. But this trend is gradually changing because of women empowerment, because women are getting educated, they're getting employed, so they have the power to influence the decision-making process in migration. Now, in the second part, I look at what are the opportunities and challenges for the migrant women. Okay, so if the woman gets to migrate, what are the opportunities for them? So if we look at the industries, the kind of jobs migrant women in South Asia are involved, it is again highly gender segregated, and women dominate the care industries, like as nurses, as domestic workers, so on and so forth, even teachers. So they work in these or hospitality sectors. So they work in these sectors. If you look at my home state in Kerala in India, 70% of the women who migrate are nurses. They are employed as nurses either in the Gulf countries or in Europe or America. And the another opportunity is that there is a growing demand for these women who work in the care industries because of the aging population in developed countries like in Europe again. So, and Gulf countries. So there is a huge inflow of work, especially from South Asia and Southeast Asia. And there are another opportunities that and benefit of women migration is that studies show that women tend to remit larger share of their income, which is crucial for poverty alleviation, especially in countries like Sri Lanka. But what are the challenges that these migrant women faces? That again is more. In terms, they face discrimination in terms of income differences, and they face kind of harassments, both physical and sexual abuse. So, there are exploitative nature of policies in their destination countries, like the kafala system in the Gulf countries, which tie them with the sponsor, and the sponsor keeps their passport, and they're subjected to all kind of harassment. So here comes my third part of the presentation, is that what is the role of the South Asian states in female migration? So here we can divide it into two parts. First, which is the predominant one, which is the role of the state as a protectionist state. Here again, this notion of the state stems from the patriarchal notion that it is the duty of the state to protect the women abroad. And because this role comes because of the immense discrimination and harassment that the women go through in the abroad. So the states take this kind of position. For example, in India prohibits women below 30 years and having not completed their matriculation to migrate for employment, irrespective of the nature and category of their work. So there is a blanket prohibition for women below 30 years who have been completed the matriculation. But these kind of protectionist role has been only counterproductive, because women tend to take illegal routes through different agents, and they use fake passports to migrate. So which again put the women in a vulnerable position. And the second strand of the role of the state, which we can see particularly in Sri Lanka, is that they take female labor export as a development strategy. And Sri Lanka in particular, and in fact, most of the Southeast Asian countries like Philippines and Indonesia take this as a development strategy, as in they build their skill of these female laborers and send them abroad, and they ensure that their women are being protected abroad also. And it would help in alleviating poverty at their home country. And that is how, when I speak about Indonesia and Philippines, we see that the ASEAN countries, the Southeast Asian countries, are using bilateral and multilateral forums to protect their female migrants. For example, in 2007, the ASEAN came up with a declaration on the protection and promotion of rights of the migrant women under the law, under the influence of Philippines and Indonesia. So these kind of innovations are being taken, and they negotiate with the GCC countries to protect their women. So they take this as a development strategy, which is not seen in most of the South Asian countries except for Sri Lanka. But the ASEAN countries are making efforts to protect their migrant women abroad and take initiatives. For example, the Colombo processes have been going on. And in the Kathmandu summit, SAARC summit in Kathmandu 2014, there was a significant improvement in getting a regional framework. But as we know that after 2014, there was no significant developments in SAARC itself. There was no SAARC summits or any efforts to take it forward through the SAARC platform. And in the last part, as a conclusion, what I want to state is that the South Asian countries need to devise plans to develop a national level migration policy and a regional level framework via SAARC that protects the rights of the migrant workers, as well as facilitate human mobility for jobs irrespective of gender, which could help these SAARC countries to take the opportunity of the aging population in the developed countries and promote female labor export like Sri Lanka, and could even become a significant soft power in the world because of their enormous young and skilled labor population. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Irfan. This is very interesting. So, yeah, actually, I think the comparison between ASEAN and South Asian countries' approach on migrations is very interesting. I mean, like from my point of view, from someone outside South Asia. We will talk about this more later after the next presentation. We would like to welcome Surbhi Thakur from Amity University, India, for the fifth presentation, The World in Motion, a Gender Perspective. Hi. Hi, Surbhi.
Hi, am I visible and audible?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Actually, it's someone else's photos coming up, so I thought it was...
Yeah, I look a little bit more matured in the photo. Okay, I'll start now. Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone watching and my fellow co-panelists. Today, I will be talking about the world in motion from a gender perspective. The migration of women has always been an important component of international migration. All migrants seek better life opportunities and in so doing are confronted by challenges. But migrant men and women do not have access to the same opportunities, nor are they confronted by the same challenges. As of 2019, the United Nations Population Division estimates that 48% of all international migrants were women or girls, and that the proportion of women among international migrants had reached 51% in more developed regions. Women often migrate officially as dependent family members of other migrants or to marry someone in another country. Female migrants are, however, increasingly part of flows of migrant workers, moving on their own to become the principal wage earners for their families. Most migrant women move voluntarily. However, women and girls are also forced migrants leaving their countries in order to flee conflict, persecution, environmental degradation, natural disasters, or other situations that affect their security, livelihood, or habitat. Now, it is important to understand the causes and consequences of international migration from a gender perspective, because hierarchical social relations related to gender shape the migration experiences of migrants, whether male or female. Understanding whether migration occurs because of gender inequality or whether migration itself helps to perpetuate gender disparities is important to guide the formulation of policies and measures to address the specific needs of women who migrate. The incorporation of gender perspective in the analysis of migration demands considering three key questions. First, how do the expectations, relationships, and hierarchies associated with being female or male affect the potential for international migration and process of migration itself? For both women and men, the economic and political context of the country of origin conditions how migration decisions are made and how migration occurs. When practices or policies in the country of origin discriminate against women by, for instance, limiting their access to resources or educational opportunities, or by hindering their political participation, the capacity of women to participate fully in society and contribute to it. These limitations also affect the potential of women to migrate and determine whether women can migrate autonomously or not. Gender relations within the family determine who migrates on their own, women or men. Gender norms about the inappropriateness of women migrating autonomously, the constraining effects of their traditional family roles, women's lack of social and economic independence, all hinder women's participation in international migration. The migration of women is also limited by the lack of connections to social networks in the country of destination that could provide information and resources to make the move possible. The second question that comes up is, how do gender inequalities in the societies of destination affect the experiences of migrant women and migrant men? Recent research has confirmed that levels of discrimination in the destination countries play an important role in shaping female migration flows, as migrant women are often attracted to countries where more gender equitable norms and practices offer them greater freedom and rights. Women migrate to work abroad in response to gender-specific labor demand in countries of destination that reflects existing values, norms, stereotypes, and hierarchies based on gender. Thus, although laws regarding the admission of migrant workers are generally gender neutral, the demand for domestic workers, nurses, and entertainers focuses on the recruitment of migrant women. Moreover, in countries of origin as well, female labor supply is the result of gender norms and stereotypes that gear women to certain traditionally female occupations. Recruitment mediators, whether private or official, also contribute to reinforce gender segregation in the labor market. The third question that comes up is, to what extent and in what ways does migration benefit or disadvantage women and men? Well, there are many ways in which migration can contribute to the empowerment of women. First, migration can offer women access to education and careers that might not be available in their country of origin. If and when such migrants return home, then their so-called circular migration process, they can take back and disseminate norms of behavior and practices that improve the position of women in their society of origin. Female refugees and asylum seekers may derive special benefits from the protection they receive in their host country and take advantage of this to acquire new professional qualifications or develop new skills. Second, migrant women may earn better incomes, enjoy greater degrees of autonomy and freedom, and exercise new leadership roles. Their social status can thus be enhanced, as can their ability to influence decision-making within their social circle. Increasing participation in society can be another example of that process. Structural changes in labor dynamics can also reflect empowerment trends, with women traditionally dominating international migration for care services as opposed to corporate leadership roles. Third, many migrant women provide steady flows of remittances to their countries of origin. The very act of sending money to family back home can be a role and even life-redefining activity whereby women have been in situations of dependency prior to departure can become a financial mainstay for their family, thus acquiring a new capital of influence and authority. Less tangible remittances transmitted, for example, in the form of social skill, expert knowledge, or technical know-how are also of significant value. When we talk about the disadvantages, we should keep in mind that women are particularly exposed to gender-based violence during the migration process and are affected disproportionately by migrant trafficking. They are also significant at risk of being recruited for forced labor in the sex trade or as domestic workers or caregivers. The trafficking of women and girls for prostitution and forced labor is one of the fastest growing areas of international criminal activity. Women who are trafficked are the most vulnerable of all migrants, as the process of trafficking involves exploitation, coercion, and the abuse of power. Trafficking builds on existing gender inequalities. Trafficked women frequently originate from regions where there are few employment opportunities for women and where women are dependent on others and lack access to resources to change the situation. Trafficked women and girls often believe they will work in legitimate occupations, but find themselves trapped into forced prostitution, marriage, domestic work, and other forms of exploitation that are similar to slavery. Monitoring gender equality requires, in the first place, accurate assessment of gender-based forms of violence and discriminatory practices. It also demands looking into all forms of women's empowerment, such as economic power, political participation, and leadership. It also facilitates the prioritization of gender in the policy agenda by significantly raising its visibility. As such, monitoring systems fulfill a strategic function by creating clear stimuli for public action, beginning with identification of funding priorities. In the context of migration, the systematic collection of sex-disaggregated data is required both at the level of migrants and social institutions. The current knowledge of international migration is still limited by data gaps, lack of reliability, and the irregularity of data collection. These are all obstacles to the establishment of strong monitoring systems. Addressing those challenges and improving the availability of data are essential for evidence-based policymaking, a principle required to achieve gender-sensitive migration governance under the IOM. By disaggregating and analyzing data by the variables female and male migrant, researchers produce broad migration statistics on these different groups. However, to understand more thoroughly the gender patterns present throughout the migration processes, more qualitative studies and inclusion of specific relevant questions in surveys are needed to reveal the power imbalances in migration decisions, labor markets, remittances, sending and utilization, and the impact of migration on social relations in the household and communities experiencing out-migration. In the end, it is very important to make strategic plans to protect women migrants. Elements in the plans could include revising national laws to make them more gender sensitive, improving capacity and coordination between different stakeholders, and lastly, and the most important of all, raising awareness on issues of women's migration and their contributions. Thank you.
Thank you, Subir. Actually, Subir also proposed many interesting measures to improve the situation, also including something about data collection. Actually, to perform any studies, especially very good quality study, kind of need quite a lot of money. But I guess that that's something that many international organizations have been doing, and I think it would be good to have a lot of exchange in terms of information between different stakeholders. We come to the last presentation by Dr. Katarina Zajacova. She is a research fellow from Roffey Park Institute, UK. The title of the presentation is Misrepresentation of Female Migrants and Refugees in the British Press Between 2015 to 2018.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for having me, and for all the presenters that already presented. Sorry, I better start my timer actually, so I can keep moving time. Let me just share my slides with you. Can everybody hear me well? Can somebody say, at least one person?
Yes.
Yeah, excellent. Well. Thank you. Okay, so it's really interesting to hear about really particular sort of situation in different parts of the world, and obviously my presentation is going to be from slightly different context. And although I do work for Roffey Park, the project that I'm going to be talking to you through really that I've been working on was for the London School of Economics and Political Science, and it's sort of still, the findings of it is still sort of ongoing. So hence the LSC logo. So I suppose when I was preparing for this presentation, I was thinking about extracting the gender element. That's my sort of area of expertise within migration studies and areas of interest. Although the project itself was very much about the media and why 2015 and 2018. To give you a little bit of an explanation, was that that's when Europe was hit by my so-called migration crisis. I always call it so-called because whether there were a crisis or not is a question of opinion, is a matter of opinion really. And how this project came about really was to sort of extract in different countries. It's a multi-national project, but I'm going to focus on the UK based a bit that we did. Was to have a look at 1 month of each of those years where we sort of consider that to be a migration crisis, and look at the coverage and how this sort of migration and refugee crisis, which was the result of Syrian conflict, but not only, how was it covered really? And so to explain how we did this, the idea was that we were going to do content analysis of the media of sources, and we chose the two most biggest and the most obvious sort of newspapers, the Times and the Guardian, one on the left sort of political spectrum and one on the right political spectrum, and quite thoroughly analysed that particular month, which was in 2015 was September, which I worked most closely on. 16 was February, so 2017 was January, and so on. And we picked 50 articles from each paper, so to see whether there's going to be differences or anything like that of the coverage, and so that made 100 per each year. So 400 articles altogether. So relatively, it's never thorough enough, but quite a big sample, and did a discourse analysis of them. Specifically, so and the sort of keywords that we put into search were really quite broad, really, as you can see below, migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers, without sort of gender lens from that point in mind. So it was more like looking at what's out there, and then following up discourse analysis on 20 more closely. In more detail, rather than just sort of factual extraction of what was mentioned, how, by whom. We're on selected themes, and I picked particularly about the theme of women, as it's kind of interesting to me. So yeah, I'm interested to hear like what do you think might be worth sort of following up from why I tell you sort of that was there. But each of those years had something very specific that sort of was mainly dominating in the news for over the whole of the year, and sort of so-called main events, if you like, and that were really dealing with masses and masses of people, of women, and the numbers of women, as many of you mentioned in your presentations, were really high, not insignificant. So it wasn't just a male sort of wave of migration at all. It was kind of, I think the numbers officially were said that it was a little bit below 50% were women, but like pretty much up there. Because families it was a lot of refugees, and families were sort of migrating from into European countries as a family unit. So women were rarely traveling on their own, rather so they're accompanying, but they were part of that migration wave. So definitely that, and sort of one of the main topics. So I'll just go few sort of statistics from them. Analysis of the articles about the countries of origin, as you can see, mostly from Syria in both papers, Times and the Guardians, and then sort of heading for obviously EU, various countries, mostly Germany, UK, but some of them are not identified. But as long as it was kind of Western Europe, passing through places like Hungary, where there was some and sort of bordering EU countries, if you like. Which were the tension points, and sort of my sort of take on this was that when looking at the articles and sort of analysing it, looking always bearing gender in mind about, and also like Amina was mentioning earlier, how important media is in then sort of consequential political events, such as within the UK, that was upcoming Brexit. And in 2016, a referendum, but also now within the COVID sort of context, how absolutely influential the language that the media, the mainstream media uses is, and how gendered this language was, and also like not just the language, but also the amount of space newspapers, these two main newspapers gave, the Guardian equally on the left side, on the left sort of political side, as much as Times on the right side. And one of the things is that if you look at these figures here, it's the 72% of the reviewed articles from the Guardian, which is which is kind of a liberal, so-called liberal paper. Definitely on the left political spectrum, did not feature women within their stories at all, like not at all, and only sort of 28% of them regard stories are related to migrant women, but mostly really briefly mentioning them as part of statistics rather than any, again, as one of you mentioned, just the last presentation we heard, qualitative sort of nature of sort of listening to some of the human stories, given how widely covered these events of those years were, people crossing, family tragedies, and just contextualizing people's stories. This was really not the case, and you couldn't really see how women were experiencing this, and occasionally women were just presented in a very passive way as just type of image of carrying a small child or something like that. So really stripped of agency. I mean, this was the case for both genders, but like much more obviously for women, so they had no space there. What else is worth mentioning here, really? The Times had it, even higher, which was to be expected. It was more than the Guardian paper on the left side. Was surprisingly gave very little space to the human aspect of these events. There was, in the proportion of articles on the women featured there only as low as 25%. Again, interlinked with commentary on children mostly, rather than that women themselves and what they left behind and how they were experiencing this process of, I think 2016 the main feature was the camps of the jungle camp in Calais in France, where people lived in terrible conditions. And heard in previous presentations, and as we know, young women are a lot more vulnerable in these refugee camp situations to violence, to sexual violence, but any just vulnerabilities are much higher. What else that I wanted to share with you, because it's time is running out. So what I wanted to also highlight is that sort of generally how gendered the language actually of the articles have been, and how the use of sort of metaphors were very, when it was so suitable for sort of raising this sort of anti-migrant sort of rhetoric in Britain at the time, Europe at the time. Then they use very masculine language of sort of aggression, often tornado, and sort of strength, or sort of that created this sort of obvious fear. So when the part of the women as a sort of migrants within this way was like really underplayed, as we know, female migrants are generally more welcomed into some countries for a number of reasons. One of them is sort of this perceived aggression of male migrants who might potentially be taking over, and sort of creating the xenophobic sort of feeling and things like that, which then showed up very much in the strengthening the anti-Brexit, pro-Brexit vote, anti-immigration vote, and sort of the impact of this coverage of this migration crisis on them following events that were to happen, were in sort of in undeniable, really, like very much, as you probably have heard, it was very much used for that. So summarizing the sort of few summarizing words in this short presentation was to, sort of macro political frames were completely overwhelmingly sort of covered. Very little human sort of, especially female stories that featured some of the explanations of actual causes of migration, the push factor, really, rather than focusing on the pull factor, which was kind of incorrect, in there. And what's more important is to actually have what's emitted and why. And I guess taking some of the my sort of preliminary conclusions so far in our discussions, I would be interested to hear from you what's worth taking away, migrant voices missing in general, and sort of more like, and how important is the way that the main and sort of newspaper and channels uses migrants and women, and how so when it suits them makes them invisible, and when it suits them uses this sort of gendered language to fire up certain national sort of sentiments. How fundamental it is that it's kind of more balanced. Obviously then with the COVID, as again we heard in Amina's presentation, this coverage of how situation within the migrant communities or ethnic group communities is covered. It has a major impact on what's perceived that is actually happening, as opposed to what is happening on the ground, and who is highlighted as somebody that is in a great need. Often women are a number of reasons that we always like to. So yeah, I think that's all, just over 12 minutes. Thank you very much for your time.
Oh, thank you very much for keeping with the time. Oh, that's very interesting. It's good to hear something from outside Asia, and it's also a totally different topic also from the rest of the other presentations. We now have some time for questions. I would start with my questions to the last presenters. Like you mentioned that, like, you know, there are a lot of things that are missing from how British media cover migration news, and how would you offer the explanations on like why, what are the factors that are behind this? Like you mentioned that, like, it's like kind of like gender blind, is masculine, and my feeling of like reading the coverage in like Southeast Asia or South Asia, and also I think that maybe because I'm from like the development background, you know, there are a lot of like media coverage that are not from the big media, but are from like, you know, are from like small outlets that are also associated with it, like some civil society groups. And so, you know, how news on migration are reported are like kind of like different from what you just presented.
Yeah, no, you know, obviously you know, there's a number of really, there's some things that when we're like going through these articles, and we are aware that there's also, and in different countries that won this project, people looked at different types of media, you know, like a local, as you said, local papers or local channels, or social media, of course, but like this still, you know, the impact of sort of these big broadsheets in Britain are quite, you know, they're quite significant. So we expected some of the things, you know, and migration is a very political issue. So how it's covered, it's kind of always been very politicized and used for different sort of reasons that it should be, rather than reporting what's happening, you know. So it's kind of this sort of idea that it's stirring certain sort of emotions, national sort of, and I think that's not necessarily, you know, British specific. That happens across, you know, cross board. So, so I think maybe if we looked at different types of media, we could see a bit more about, you know, human story. But and what was surprising really is that the left-leaning paper, The Guardian, like really didn't differ that much as opposed to sort of their opposition, and that they completely dehumanized the. You know, the size of the crisis at the time was one of the biggest in however many years, you know. So it wasn't something insignificant, and yet there was just like I mean, I kept looking for something that so I could hear some actual voice of those actors. And I guess it's just making it seemed really sort of prevalent that they didn't want you to imagine a migrant from Syria, or from, you know, I think Syria was predominantly the country that was mentioned specifically, as somebody who, you know, with the job left behind as a professional, you know, it's just, you know, and it just played into all those stereotypes of male, you know, potentially dangerous or draining sort of individual on the society. So, you know, it really did. And I mean, women, again, like if they were mentioned, there was this sort of victimization of it, which you can also like argue that, you know, that it's not, they didn't kind of present Migration Act or you know, moving across as an empowering act, you know, which often, as we know, migration is, but very sort of played on that sort of victim side of it. So yeah, there's, I don't know really how different it is, you know, how much better your you know, your side of the world sort of pays attention to details of stories. And I understand that, you know, you have to report on numbers but the amount of space that politicians got, you know, there's a lot of voice from obviously like leaders of European countries, Germany, Hungary, and EU politicians, but literally nothing sort of to contrast it with the people on the ground.
Mm-hmm. So thank you. And we also have another question for you, Dr. Katarina from Vijayta Mahendru. The issue you raise about difference in women's voices in migrant stories in the media, don't you think that this is an issue with every other field of migration stories, like labor migration? What can be done to go around this gender blindness?
I think if I understand, yeah, thank you. If you understand the question correctly, I think, no, I don't think it's necessarily gender specific. I mean, I take interest in gender. I mean, when you looked up, obviously, if you look at, you know, people's, as you said, like elements of labor or, you know, or a disability. And I mean, I didn't present you with all the statistics about other aspects about gender that weren't very talked about. It's more about, it doesn't look at micro level, you know, micro level, it looks like very much macro levels. And also it doesn't contextualize things, you know, it doesn't really explain what it mean, you know, what does that mean, like what does those statistics, you know, what the actual impact for the receiving country would be, or how many, so working on some sort of integration policies, or, you know, like crime prevention, for example, and things like that. So it doesn't really go into details of that. I mean, you wouldn't expect that necessarily in every article, but you would expect to pick up on certain aspects of, you know, health issues, or, you know, schooling of children. You know, they wouldn't look very much. They talk about children only, again, like this sort of imagery. You know, there was that one. There's the iconic image of a little boy that drowned, sadly. You know, and his dad, you know, carrying his body. So they play on people's emotions in all sorts of ways, but they don't explain sort of context of that, and where they like even the really simple things, really, like where. I mean, I sort of showed you where they're coming from and things like that, but like that was actually very, very few times mentioned, even the country of origin, you know, even something like Syria. It was just a kind of a passing comment in that. So, you know, it doesn't sort of depersonalizes the stories. And I mean, I'm qualitative researcher, so I don't, you know, I mean, not that I don't consider statistics and numbers important, they absolutely are, they contextualize it. But without that nuanced information, you know, and how little of it there is, and, you know, so the lack of attention is not just paid to gender; it's paid to other elements as well.
Mm-hmm. We also have questions for other speakers, but there's also one more question for you, Dr. Katarina. So this is from Tamanna, Khosla. How much do you trust newspaper research as they are funded by corporates? Really sorry, actually this is for everyone. She said it to everyone.
Yeah, for everyone. I would be interested what you think, you know. It's, I guess we're looking at it as a sort of, yeah, I mean, we weren't questioning like where, I mean, we picked the most obvious ones in Britain rather than going for specific ones, but we it's as a people sort of the biggest sort of consumers of news from those two sort of papers. Of course, you know, it's obvious. I mean, the political leaning is really clear, but also, I guess, you know, who is behind them. Yeah, I suppose you can say that about any news channels.
Yeah. What about other people? Do you have anything to say about like how much we can trust the newspaper? Okay, if no one give further comments, so let's move on to the next question from Vijayta to Amina. So many issues you raise about the problems that Rohingya women face are similar to what women from many communities face in South Asia. How does being a migrant make the experience of Rohingya women distinct?
Oh, okay. So I think many of the issues which I have raised is not just that the women in the South Asia are facing. Yes, generally the refugee women in all over the world are facing so many issues. But what makes the Rohingyan crisis or the refugee crisis of Rohingyan women different is because it is the largest and fastest growing refugee crisis in all over the world since the Rwandan genocide. And also, I think what is different in all other refugee crisis and the Rohingyan women, what they are facing is the internalization of the concept of patriarchy. Or since the Rohingyan Muslim women are so much internalized or socially conditioned, and they are forced to obey what their husbands or what their father has told them. Also, there is something a major role the community has to play. And I think as a Muslim woman, I think so that the community has a very important role to play in kind of teaching you how you should behave, how you should dress, how you should go outside, how you should talk and everything like that. And also, for example, I can tell you one thing. In cases of family issues among the Rohingyan women, most cases women are sent back to their husband's family because of the fear that they won't be having any financial stability, they won't be having no opportunity to earn, and the women cannot remarry, but the men can. So I think it's a lot of thing like which is kind of internal issues. And also, rather than speaking externally, there are a lot of things which is socially conditioned among the community. And also, if we look at the statistics, it accounts for 80 million people are the Rohingyan refugees. So I think the population do play an important role in that. So I think these all are the issues.
Okay, thank you, Amina. The next question is for everyone. So we would like to hear voices from other speakers also who haven't answered the question yet. Do you think that the government across borders use women-centered policy only as a face cover? Aren't they basically against gender-based equality? Tamanna, would you like to respond to this? Hello? Anyone would like to respond to this?
Yeah, I guess, the concept of citizenship has to be remolded. It has to, as Katarina was also talking, and many of our speakers were also talking, it should be, where differences have to be recognized. But as far as the cross-border thing is concerned, it is surely taken, it is just a face over. And, many times, you have the hawks taking over rather than the doves. And but who is a dove changes over the time. Sometimes somebody's a dove, sometimes somebody's a dove. So I guess as far as my presentation was concerned, I was more interested in looking at the concept of citizenship, which should have areas of empathy and women-centric policies should be there, and it should become a consensual thing worldwide. And I guess UN is encouraging it, and I guess that's important in all the countries, be it US, UK, anywhere. Thank you.
Anyone else would like to also express your view?
I would like to comment on that. Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, so in my presentation, I did speak about the protectionist role of the state, especially in the South Asian countries, like how they restrict the migration of women of the world because they feel that women are unsafe and needs to be protected. But there is a paradox here, because this is connected to the international migration and cross-border migration. But if you look at the internal migration within these South Asian countries, there is no proper mechanism to protect the rights of the migrants who migrate internally. They show in the outside that they are the protector of women, they need to safeguard it. But with regard to internal migration, there is no proper mechanism that we saw, particularly during the pandemic, how migrants in South Asian countries, particularly in India, face so much troubles and vulnerabilities due to the immediate lockdown.
Okay, thanks.
That's it.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Binodkumar, do you have anything to say? Because you also talk about, you also have like your a proposal on like what the government should do. Do you think that?
Yes, yes, the problem of the trafficking of women and children is the most serious one. Government should try to control this increasing number of trafficking number of women and children. That's what I want to come.
Mm-hmm. And anybody else want to add any comments on any issues that you would like to express more? Because we are actually I think the time is already like up, but we also started late. But if no one else has anything to say, I think it's probably time to end this session. It's quite a pity today that like we did not have more time, because I actually have more questions to ask each presenters, but that's fine. I think we can keep in touch and can share our opinion and information later. On behalf of NIICE Nepal, I would like to thank the panelists and the audience for joining this session. I hope that you all enjoy and learn something from this session today. Have a good day and enjoy the next sessions of this conference. And thank you very much for NIICE Nepal for inviting me to join this session today.
Ma'am, it's our pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you so much for joining in. So to deliver the vote of thanks, I would like to thank each one of you who has contributed to make this event a resounding success. First of all, ma'am, I'd like to thank you, Dr. Sasiwan, for chairing this event, and then I'd like to thank all the speakers for delivering such comprehensive and convincing presentations in such a short span of time. Thank you so much for joining in, and I would also like to thank on behalf of NICE to all the experts, people from the academia and from different organizations who have helped us in this particular event. And I'd also like to mention our deep sense of appreciation for the audience who has participated in this webinar and those who are watching us live on the Facebook channel. Thank you so much for your valuable time and attention, and for making this session productive with your questions. It's truly been an honor to have you, to listen each of you, and I just want you to stay connected with NICE in the future as well. Thank you so much, and please join us in the next session as well.